We're going to look at finding a polynomial of a given degree with given zeros, and our zeros are going to be real. Notice first that the instructions here say to leave our answer in factored form. This is amazing, right? We like that. I also, before we start, want to remind you that if C is a zero, then x minus c is a factor. So you should have already been given the factored form and pulled the zeros out. So now we're just going the opposite direction. So going pretty slowly with this first, if 2 is a 0, then that means that x minus 2 is a factor. If 6 is a 0, then x minus 6 is a factor. Let's skip the next one for a second and continue. If negative 4 is a 0, then x plus 4 is a factor, right? So it's always the opposite sign. And then we also have 8. So if 8 is a 0, then x minus 8 is a factor. So I'm going to put f of x out here in front. And then we didn't address the 0. So let's talk about that right now. If 0 is a 0, let's think about what that factor would be. Well, everything else it subtracts, right? So it would be x minus 0, but x minus 0 is just x, right? So what we do is we don't put x minus 0, and instead we just put an x. Okay, so anytime you have a 0 of 0, that's going to give you an x. And again, we don't have to multiply these out. Isn't that nice? Okay, so looking at our next guy, we have a degree 3, and we only have 2 zeros. Notice this first one says we have a 0 of 2 with a multiplicity of 2. So if the 0 is 2, that means the factor is x minus 2. And if it has a multiplicity of 2, that means that that is the power. And then we have a 0 of negative 9, which means that our factor is x plus 9. And again, if we're writing the function, we should always start with f of x. Okay, now we have a 5th degree polynomial. I'm going to go ahead and put my f of x in here. We have a 0 of 1, so that's a factor of x minus 1. I have a 0 of negative 5, so that's a factor of x plus 5. I have a 0 of negative 4, so that's a factor of x plus 4. And its multiplicity is 2, which means that factor is squared. And then we have a 0 of 6, which means my factor is x minus 6. And the last one here, I'm going to go ahead and write f of x equals. It starts by telling me that I have a 0 of 0, so I'm going to go ahead and put my x in there. And then I have a 0 of 6, so that's a factor of x minus 6. And that 0 has a multiplicity of 2, which means my factor is squared. And then lastly, I have a 0 of negative 5, which is a factor of x plus 5.